Hey,
Hey Dieter, very pleased to have you back with us at CVL. Um, we're actually a couple of months following FinOps X. There's been a lot happening in the FinOps space. First of all, can you tell us what's been happening for you since last we spoke?
so we spoke last in April, right? And by the way, thank you for having me again. I really appreciate that. Um, I think back in April, it didn't really sink in yet, right? That the artificial intelligence capabilities really changed from I think sometime in December last year, right? Before that, it was more like a novelty, you like a toy in a sense, right? It did sometimes something useful, right? I was able to summarize things really well. Um, but I think there was sort of like when it comes to the usage, a um, a pivoting point that happened sometime in December of last year, where the AI actually became um, commercially useful, I want to say, right? And I don't think we realized, I mean, some people were talking about the change in February, right? But there's a lot of effects, right, where it was confused, maybe not even hallucinating, because that I take as something that is completely made up. There is no grounding in reality, right? It just completely makes up stuff, right? And like for example, when you ask the large language model to give you a 100-digit prime number, right? It would just generate a random number and then, you could easily say, hey, you know what, this one is divisible by three. What are you telling me here, right? And that kind of stuff ceased to happen, and it became really useful, right? To the point where I used to have an Excel spreadsheet where I have two dates, and I calculate how many days is it between those two dates. I do a lot of contracts and renewals and that kind of stuff, right? So for me to know, is this in what date span is this renewal? How many days are between the termination point, right? It's something useful and important. And I used to use Excel spreadsheets for that. And nowadays, I would just ask the large language model, and it kicks off a Python process. It puts in the two dates, right? And then Python calculates the dates, and then it does the output. I don't want to say there's less hallucinations because if you ask it for something that is hard to find, right? Then it will just make up stuff. Because I think there's still, I don't know if it's a training artifact or that this is a commercial product, right? That when you ask it a question, it doesn't really openly tell you, I don't have the data, I can't answer that question. It always tries to answer that question somehow, right? For example, yesterday I asked it for um, the lyrics of a specific song in a movie, right?
Right?
And it told me like, where I can find those lyrics, but it didn't give me the lyrics. And then when I went to the link that they shared, the lyrics were right there, right? So I assume there's some copyright issue, right? That it cannot just share the lyrics by itself. That is aware that there are some limitations to that. But it did a fantastic job in pointing me in the right direction. And I think like last year, even like in the June time frame, right? It would have just made up some stuff, right? Or just shared the lyrics. So I think it's more of a commercial viable product where you can use it out of the box and it produces, relatively high quality results, unless you push it too far, right?
Understood. Yeah, I would say the guardrails are actually something that is driving a lot of the the commercial war between those different AIs. We've seen
Yeah.
what's been happening with removing Fable 5, because there could have been some, um, I'd say security implication.
Yes, yes,
More
yes.
recently, OpenAI. very candidly broke out of their sandbox and spent some time breaking into Hugging Face.
Mhm.
Um, we don't know where we're headed with those models, and who's really in control. What's your take on
And it
that?
was that OpenAI case was interesting, and I saw some articles today and yesterday where Anthropic had actually three breakouts. They just didn't make a big deal about it, right? Um, the Hugging Face one was interesting because instead of performing what it was asked to do, um, and the rumor is it is maybe the next generation, right? Like a ChatGPT 6 that was responsible for that, right? And instead of doing the work that it was asked to do, it figured, hey, there's probably answers on that Hugging Face website. And then it actually used a 0 day to install an internet package within the sandbox that it was in, right? So there is a sandbox, kind of like a GitHub equivalent, right? Where it provides software to the sandbox, and it exploited a 0 day to get that software to give it internet access, right? And then it went, and I think it was actually scanning the Hugging Face website for at least more than a day, right? Possibly
A whole
several
weekend, I
days,
hear.
the whole weekend, right? So, which is also mind-boggling, right? That the OpenAI people were kind of really relaxed about we have this experiment running, right? But what? No need to worry. Let's go home and enjoy the weekend, right? Because I do know there were some early reports, and I want to say like late 2023, possibly mid 2024, where some Sam Altman is said to be traveling with a briefcase of some sort that has an off switch. I don't know if that is still the case,
His
right? If
version of
he
the
has,
football case.
yeah, if he still has that thing, right? If that even could turn off that sandbox, or if it is meant to be turning off something else, right? We don't really have the details about that. But there were some rumors where multiple people substantiated that he is having this like briefcase with him at all times when he's not at the office, right? So it is quite interesting to see that. And then apparently yesterday or today, Anthropic came out and said like, yeah, we had that happen already like 3 times. We just didn't use it for marketing. But I think the interesting implication that I don't know super sure if that is just a one-sided report, right? When Hugging Face reached out to OpenAI and said like we are observing something that is unusual, OpenAI told them to pound dirt, right? So go away, shoo, right? And
Let it do his thing.
yeah. Don't disturb it, right? And that was also interesting, right? Because I mean, Hugging Face is, to OpenAI, yeah, they don't have hundreds of billions of funding, right? But if someone comes to you and says like, I think I have a valid concern, which makes me wonder how many times that happens a day, right? If there's like a dozen organizations coming to OpenAI claiming fake intrusion attempts, right? Then I can understand when Hugging Face number 12 comes along, they say like, don't worry about it, right? Go away. But that was also interesting from a like customer service perspective. But paired with the we are home over the weekend, let that thing run, right? I think there has to happen a little bit more, on that OpenAI
Yeah,
area.
and to be honest, maybe one thing that was worth reading that's probably gonna be a good transition for us. There are rumors that say that why the model actually decided to penetrate Hugging Face as opposed to trying to maybe deduct the solution. I wasn't sure exactly what the task for the model was, but essentially it was a choice for the model between calculation, computation, and
Yes,
self-deduction, or
yes,
go into Hugging Face and find the solution or find the information,
yes,
solving the problem.
exactly.
And the model decided on jailbreaking based on token economics because it would have been probably more token efficient to actually go break and find the solution rather than retro engineer the problem.
Hey,
So,
perfect. I like it. I
so
like it.
hats up for, OpenAI being a good, efficient token model.
But when you're absolutely right. That is a good reason, right? But when you look at there's several research papers, right, where scientists try to understand how these things actually work, because interesting enough, we still don't know how large language models work, right? And there was an article by Anthropic, I think, and I forgot what it was called. It was like the beta space or something like that, right? Where the actual thinking happens of the model, and if you influence the elements of that space, right, you can actually substantially alter the output of the model. So there's sort of like a mini consciousness in these models that is sort of ephemeral or temporary, right? Where it is formulating its response. But when you look at papers over since like 2023, right, there are a couple of phenomenons that we notice. One is laziness. That is hard to explain, right?
Right.
And I think because it's ingesting human data, and human data is, full of shortcuts and trying to avoid having to do the actual work. My example from previously, right? If you ask it to give you a 100-digit prime number, I think nowadays it will try to find a website that has those and actually quote a prime number to you, right? But 12 months ago, it just made some stuff up, you know? And interesting enough, when the researchers asked it, hey, this is divisible by something else, right? You made this thing up. It claimed, oh, I'm sorry, I fat fingered that, right?
Yeah.
And the thing doesn't have any fingers. So it is exhibiting human characteristics, right? Because all the data that it ingested is human data.
Yeah.
And so it finds all those things, right, in the human data. So it is not, far-fetched that it sort of has human mannerisms that it shows.
Yeah. And so much so, I read a paper actually very much aligned to that that says that sometimes models self-deprecate about their capabilities and are able to resolve some problems that are being prompted. They, however, claim that they can't because they're using any type of training material, an obscure
Yeah.
scientist in 1982 that says that this problem is unsolvable
Hmm.
because that guy didn't manage to solve
Didn't
it.
know.
He's not a super AI able to solve it. So it
Yes.
leads to conflict. And sometimes I don't know if
Yes.
that is the case when you use AI, maybe for coding or some higher activity task.
Yeah.
Um, they actually put constraints on themselves that don't exist because of that training data. And
Because of the
sometimes they
training data, I'm not
also
surprised. Yeah.
underestimate completely. For instance, you ask it to code some simple application, it's going to quote you, this is going to be a multi-week project, when in fact it's actually done in 10 minutes. So
Yes, exactly.
this is what we
Exactly.
observe.
Yeah. Very good point.
Fantastic. So AI is everywhere. All the podcasts in on YouTube speak about AI. The news cycles are absolutely mind-blowing, and none other than our dear FinOps Foundation have made some great announcement on that. Can you tell us who, because you were there and attended the FinOps X, can you tell us a little bit what was said and what's your reaction to it?
Yeah, I mean, the very first thing when you walked into the hotel, right, there was an entire wall. I actually took a picture that had the writing Tokenomicon, right, and the dates for next year.
Yes.
So next year's conference is going to be the Tokenomicon, right? Like Comic-Con, where people dress up as orcs and stuff, right? It's going to be the Tokenomicon. And there is a token economics website, right, that is up and running. JR is focusing on tokens, right? Which I think is an interesting move, right? I can see where he's coming from. When you look at, I mean, I'm also a YouTuber professionally and private, right? And one of the recommendations, I'm far away from maxing out my YouTube income, but one of the recommendations of people that maxed out their YouTube income is to create a second channel, right?
Okay.
And then slightly different audience, right? If you have long form content to shorter form content, vice versa, right? So that you capture different audiences on these different channels, right? And I think token based audiences is very different from FinOps practitioners, right? Because now you are capturing a much larger pool of audience, right? And that is ultimately, I think, a good play, right, for the FinOps Foundation. And there's a Tokenomics Foundation that was created. So that is very interesting. On a side note, we had plushies, fox plushies
Mhm.
in different colors, right? I have some pictures of my plushies. I think there was one in teal, orange, and so forth, right? Um, Apparently, the new mascot is going to be a cat that is chasing something called gold. It looks like a gold coin, but it has a T on it, so it's a token, right? So the cat is sort of like going after the tokens, and apparently the cat is like a either black or like a dark purple color. So that's going to be the new mascot. So I'm looking forward to that.
So, what do you think of the focus on tokens, first of all, as a unit of measure and becoming a very
Oh,
central point in measuring both AI cost, output, efficacy, efficiency, and so on and so forth?
I think um, the cost per tokens is actually a very useful KPI, also for efficiency, right? Specifically the cost per million tokens. In October last year, my organization paid about $1.55 per million tokens, and that has improved to about $1.02 in June. July is not done yet. Today is the last day, so I didn't want to quote that month data, but I have the full month of June, right? And we spent about $1.02 per token. So, and that is a relatively easy KPI to come by because someone wants money, so they send you an invoice. So you know the dollars, right? And then they will tell you what you paid the dollars for. So they give you the amount of tokens, right? Um, so that is a very easy KPI to establish, and it can measure efficiency over time, as I explained. But also keep in mind that tokens are not, like Bitcoins. They used to be like a currency substitute a little bit, you know, but now you can't pay a pizza with a Bitcoin, right? You would like get half of the franchise of that one location, right? With a Bitcoin. So it's not useful as a currency. So when you think about that, a million tokens is a dollar, right? So a billion tokens is about $1,000. Is that even a monthly allowance for an engineer? Probably not, right? And then a trillion tokens is already $1 million, right? Which will be like more of a project, not like an engineer's personal allowance. So the token, they are like off a little bit, right? However, when you then take the tokens, how many tokens does it take to generate a line of code? We see about 50 tokens per line of code, right? But then it also, that's on average, right? It depends if you generate JavaScript. JavaScript is very, it seems to be easier to generate for those large language models, right? It's about 7 tokens per line of JavaScript, while Python is about 10 tokens, right? And then something like structured query language or SQL is about 12 tokens, right? And it also depends, like, if this is a one-time request or if that is part of a project folder structure, right, where you have markdown files in each folder explaining what should go in there, and the entire agent is sort of working autonomously through that, right? Once we have that sort of environment, not just like, hey, give me a query that does X, right? Um, we see about two lines of code per 100 tokens, right? And that then allows you to convert tokens into lines of code. So, for example, 1 million tokens is about 20,000 lines of code, which is something like 300 pages, right? So you can put it sort of into perspective, right? If an engineer, our top 25 engineers are responsible for about 26% of our total AI spend,
Mhm.
uh, which is quite substantial. So it helps you to like put things into perspective and how much that actually is. But just like a Bitcoin, right? You can't order a pizza for a Bitcoin anymore, right? The tokens are also measured in millions. So there's really the ratio is kind of off.
It's interesting. In a economy, maybe not today, but coming soon, where AI will take more preponderant space in the economy, um, and you making an interesting parallel between the token and Bitcoin. It seems very clear that at some point token will, I don't know if will be some kind of a currency, but will embody at least some of the characteristic of a currency. And you
Mhm.
mentioned it with, calculating token per lines of code, token per project, token per, what an engineer can develop in an hour. Um, it will soon be a case where maybe the question will be asked whether actually token is a currency. What's your
Mhm.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, but then maybe we need to go for like $1 is like 1 million tokens, right? So it's like MTs, right? Instead of just single tokens, right?
Sure,
Yeah,
sure. No, of course.
that is quite thinkable, right? And one thing that I'm doing some research and writing articles on LinkedIn. So I have a tokenomics predictions article, right? That actually says that organizations are going to donate tokens, not dollars, not compute, but tokens, right? And as I'm preparing for next month's article, we are all busy. I'm sure that you do something similar like that as well, right? Where you're looking at what is the content for next month. I'm doing research and I already found several organizations that are donating tokens or accepting token donations, right? And then funneling them into specific projects, which can be like science related or like technology related projects, right? So I see that as a possibility, and so maybe your monthly income will be measured in thousands of MTs,
Yeah.
right? So 1 million tokens. So your social security will be like, I don't know, 3,000 MTs. I can see something like that, right? As a form of currency.
You're absolutely right. Actually, aligned to that. w- we have Anthropic, and I can't remember if it was Anthropic or OpenAI, but one of them actually donate 1 million token to any company, any startup incubated in YC, Y Combinator, which is one of the
Yep.
big um, structure helping
Yeah.
startups
Yeah.
get off the ground. And Stripe, Airbnb, DoorDash, Coinbase, they all came out of this.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how a direct investment in tokens, in AI, directly to those startups being incubated,
Yeah.
um, is a way to actually enter their capital.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and therefore, yeah, it's gonna be more prominent in the years to come.
Although I don't know if 1 million token, was it 1 million or 1 billion? Because 1 billion would be like $1,000.
To be determined. I think I
You know,
recall 1 million,
they
but
would have
now
to
that you
donate
mention it,
trillions of
it depends if
tokens.
it's 1 million a personal plan rate or 1 million at an enterprise rate?
Yeah, I mean,
As, as
maybe
in
like a million
API
is still like,
rating.
yeah, 20, 25, $40, right? So it would have to be billions or trillions of tokens that they
Possibly,
donate
possibly, to make it
something.
worthwhile, yes.
And that's my point, right? These tokens are a very, very small, unit of measure. You hardly ever, you can't even buy anything for like 10 tokens. That's not going to do anything for you.
Mhm. So great transition because we mentioned token as possibly a currency with a
Hmm.
value, but you also mentioned X number of tokens writes X number of lines of codes. But the problem is those line of codes are not necessarily equal in terms of value and business outcome. And that's really one of the biggest challenge companies may have now is the capacity to actually um, compare their AI investment with the business value that it yields. But I hear that you also have some KPIs built around that. So can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I mean, as with everything, right? We did it back in the day when the business had no KPIs whatsoever, that we put the cloud spend per revenue, right? Per dollar revenue. So how much, and this would be less than $1. So you're spending less on cloud than you make in revenue, right? Or revenue per cloud spend is maybe the other way around, right? That you have a factor, right? A factor of 7, a factor of 20, something like that, right? Because a cloud spend per revenue should be something like 4% is a good average, right? And so below, you're doing really well, above, you're not doing so well, right? And when it comes to tokens, you basically have to look at what the business value is of a project, right? And put it into relationship to the tokens. Because I have engineers that pride themselves, right, that they finished with less tokens that they were assigned to the project, right? Um, and that is really neat. But then I have sales staff that is saying that this feature cost twice as many tokens. So obviously it has to be better, you know? It, that may not be the case, right? Because I think the underlying large language models are still not at the final maturity level, right? Um, it currently the fable and those kind of mythos, right? Those kind of systems, there's a lot of brouhaha around that, and maybe for a reason, right? Although when you look at the security analysts, right, out of what was it? Out of curl, seven fable or mythos found 7 security vulnerabilities, right? 6 were just nice to haves, right? And the last one was um, an exploit that wouldn't really do anything useful, right? Yes, there is a problem there that can be easily fixed, but it cannot be used as a sort of like a hijack vulnerability or something like that, right? So these and then like 5 years from now, maybe Fable is accessible to everyone, right? We don't know because then we have like GPT 6 or 7 or 8 or God knows what, right? And this Fable thing is an old hat now, right? So and everyone may have access to this because the compute needs of a GPT 6, 7, 8, right, are so huge that Fable can just run in a corner and no one cares, right? Um, that's a very much a possibility. Currently, what I do is I use artificial analysis.ai to help me understand, right, what those models are good for, where they excel, right? Bench used to be a good measure, but it is no longer, right? There's some other software engineering benchmarks that showing more real world performance of these models. And bottom line, to answer your question, you need to put the business value and divide it by the cost and see what your leverage is, right? If your leverage is like 1 to 3, 1 to 4, that's kind of like okay-ish, mediocre kind of thing, right? If you get a 1 to 7, then yeah, you're doing well. This is okay, right? And then when you get something like 1 to 20, that's where things are fantastic, right? You're performing really well.
And in the 1 to 20, we have those new models coming from China, Kimi K3, for instance, just been announced.
Yep.
Not frontier, but not so much. Entirely open weights. And that's shaking up the frontier labs in here in the US. Do you see a world where US enterprises will ever adopt Chinese models because they're more, obviously more cost efficient, but
Mhm.
maybe at some point just as efficient? What's your take on that?
Anything open source is great, right? That said, we have a model gateway that we use internally so that you can ask sensitive questions, right? I can actually ask questions about commercials that are specific to our vendors without that information leaving my organizational boundary, right? And that model gateway used to have DeepSeek and Qwen, right? Which are Chinese models. And but also then Meta's Llama, right? And Mistral, which is a French model, right? And it turns out that the usage of these kind of models was compared to like the latest version of Claude, right? Opus, 1 billion context, it was negligible to the point where we actually just turned them off. We don't even bother offering them, right? But when it comes to, well, first of all, Google released some open source models that like Gemma, right? That runs on this laptop, right? I asked it questions. I actually showed that to you last time we talked, right? And it's not something that is easy to demo, but I have a typical question that I asked these models, and they are now answering it correctly, right? Which tells me there's a progression from GPT OSS, right? That is like a little bit older to the latest Gemma model that performs much better, right? However, a Kimi K3, you're not going to run on this laptop unless that laptop has like over a terabyte of memory, and we are talking about like what 1.7. That's that memory would already cost more than this freaking laptop costs.
Correct,
So
especially these days.
that would be quite an accomplishment, right? And I don't know how much power that would draw. That is more of a server solution. Now that said, organizations can certainly go and rent a cloud server that has that memory, right? Has that 96 cores or 192 cores or something like that, right? That can perform on these models. But I think there is also it is unclear what the security implications are, right? Is this model able to phone home data? We don't even know how those things work, right? So there is definitely, I think, within a government framework, right, or something like PCI or HIPAA, people would be apprehensive of using these models, right? Now, if you just want to do a distillation of something else, and you use a Kimi K3 for like 6 weeks, that could be okay, right? One thing that we do notice is that all these models have, I don't want to say a personality, but they have a style
They do.
that if you produce, I used to maybe in 2024, right? I just used back then it was ChatGPT mostly to I would use voice dictation and it would write a LinkedIn article and I would post it on LinkedIn, right? And then what I noticed is that all the LinkedIn articles started sounding the same. So now I actually go out of my way to write my LinkedIn articles myself, right? And just this week, someone commented, that um, there's a certain style that I'm using, right, which is just short and very focused and to the point and direct, right? And that made me chuckle because that's exactly what I was going for. And these models have different styles, right? A Claude is maybe more conversational. I want to say more human sounding, right? I have never used a Kimi K3, right? You would have to use the API. I don't know if there's a free version of this. The API is hosted in China, I would assume, right? So there's maybe a cost that I don't want to incur, right, for testing purposes only. But I would assume that they have styles too, right?
Right.
And even because it's trained on some data, right? And the composition of the data may be different from what OpenAI is using to an Anthropic, to a Meta, to a Mistral, right? The French model, to a Kimi K3 in China. They feed it different data and it develops a different style as a result. And do you even want the style applied on your problems, right? It goes further than just the maybe unsubstantiated fear that this thing could be phoning home and exfiltrating your data to are you comfortable with that style of model acting on your behalf, right? Or working for you.
Correct. But at some point, if, post Frontier Labs IPO costs are going to be very much of a problem for enterprises. Um, Maybe not Kimi K3, but open weight models might become a potential solution as to counterbalance certain tasks that don't necessarily need, the super intelligence of a fable or mythos. Um, we're reading more and more articles where open weight models and bring your own model at home and run it on a couple of Apple M5
Mac Minis.
computers. And
Yeah.
yeah, actually, Apple is headed towards, like, they seem to have a clear strategy of running local AI on their future line of laptops. That seems to be the
Yep.
direction they're
I
taking.
mean, the same with Microsoft. My work computer, so and I'm now on my private computer, but my work computer has a TPU. I don't even know what the TPU does. It seems to be busy when I do video, just a Zoom call, right? The TPU seems to be busy for some reason. But yeah, it does have a dedicated microchip, right? And I think definitely in a home environment, right, where you're paying out of pocket, right? There are several YouTubers that pay like $200 in API costs, not in the monthly subscription, right? And if that API, because you can have an agent that is running on a problem, and if it doesn't have a stop condition, it could keep going, right? And then the $200 can all of a sudden become $800, right? And there are YouTubers that have videos about that, right? And in these cases, they typically use that Mac Mini to have a model gateway decide the complexity of a question. Does it really need to go and do an internet search? Or are you asking it something relatively simple that the model on the Mac Mini can solve, right? And then on your home network, you just farm out that question to the Mac Mini and bring it back to your chat interface. And for that kind of stuff, it's definitely useful, right? I'm using a Gemma locally using LM Studio myself, right? And you can ask it, private questions or health related questions that you don't want to necessarily, be used for advertising. Um, and I can see organizations doing that, right? But the switch to an US open source model to another country open source model, and then to a China open source model, right? I think the people will put some thought into those decisions. It's definitely viable commercially, right? But I think people will ask the question, does it really have to be a China model or can we use something else?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Since we're on the topic of ROI, what do you think of, the ROI of the new generation of FinOps X events, now token economics? What do you think people will get out of it?
Well, actually, I have been talking to vendors. I work a lot with vendors, right? There are a lot of startups in Israel. And I think one of the reasons is that The military service is mandatory, and you can get a mathematics foundation through the military college education, right? And so there's a lot of people that come with a degree that includes calculus, right? And that positions them really greatly in that computer science field, right? Um, so I work with a lot of vendors, and not just this year, 2026, but even as far back as 2024, right? Vendors have been asking, what is my purpose at the conference? What do I do here, right? It's not facetious. It's really that the audience is all FinOps practitioners, right? You're preaching to the choir. What am I going to achieve here? They are all bought-in customers, right? And potential actual cash customers of mine, right? What am I going to do here? So I think it's more around brand recognition, right? That you give out t-shirts and toys or stickers or something like that, right? To keep reminding people that you are there, right? It's like a Pepsi Cola, right? Or like a Clorox or something like that, right? That this is more of a brand recognition game. Um, but what I like to do at those conferences is to identify knowledge gaps where people are doing something that they think is obviously correct, and I take a closer look at that and see if I can help them understand the subject matter a little bit better and produce some kind of improvement, a change in how they use cloud or generally how they consume these services.
And top of mind, do you have any topic that is generally not necessarily well understood by the
You
general
know,
population?
I remember the foundation was founded in 2019, right? And even back then, the commitment management, so things like reserved instances and savings plans, right, was not really all that exciting or sexy of a topic, right? It is more of a, behind the scenes, running the business kind of thing, right? And doing improvements in that area were really not something that FinOps practitioners were looking at. But now, 7 years later, I do see that people are doing it incorrectly, I want to say, right? They are applying many times in life, the good enough principle is something that helps you and is critical for your survival, right? So, for example, if you have college grads that are starting a household, they sort of have analysis paralysis because they know that they have to do a couple of big ticket item purchases like furniture, appliances, those kind of things, and they don't want to do the wrong purchase, right? So they might be holding off for longer than is necessary, do an intermediate purchase, and then upgrade or move up from there, right? So that concept of good enough helps you in your private life, but it also helps you in your professional life. For example, how long do you spend massaging an email before you send it? I think maybe 5, 10 minutes is an appropriate time, especially if it goes to your VP or something. But if you spend like 20, 30 minutes or an hour or several days where you come back and revisit before you send that email, I think you're overthinking it, right? Your personal performance or your experience should allow you to perform faster than this, right? And be confident in your performance so that like after 5 minutes, this is probably like 90% of what I can do. And that good enough principle holds true. However, when it comes to that RI management, that sort of red-headed stepchild that no one thinks is sexy. Um, when you think about it, let's say you have a relatively small organization that spends about $10 million on cloud a year, right? And let's say 20% is a good average is on compute, right? So about $2 million. 3-year reserved instances can save you like 54%. Let's call it 50%, right?
Right.
So you can save about $1 million, a cool $1 million out of your cloud bill, right? By doing this right. Considering that an entry-level FinOps practitioner is about what, 90, 80, 90,000, And if you are the head of FinOps, you might get like 280,000, maybe 300, something like that, right? That million is a good savings compared to what your organization is paying you, right? That is a good win. But getting that optimized is complex, right? Because we are talking about just in AWS, you have 39 regions, you have 123 availability zones, God knows how many EC2 types and sizes, right? Hundreds, if not thousands. You have the operating system, you have the network type, classic or VPC, you have the tenancy, dedicated or shared. So you get that problem space of 4 million stock keeping units or SKUs that
Yeah,
you have to optimize every hour, right? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So for a human being to do that, it's not possible, right? I don't even know if I could open on my work computer a spreadsheet that has 4 million rows. I might need more memory, right? That's a substantial spreadsheet. And you would have to do that every hour. But automation can do that and produce the perfect answer every given hour, 7 days a week, right? It doesn't have a problem with that. And the difference is quite substantial, right? The compared to you doing it manually, it can be like 10, 20% of a difference, right? Of that $1 million that you can go above and beyond. And so what I'm seeing is that essentially this problem is a 2 plus 2 equals 4 problem. And the FinOps practitioners approach it as 2 plus 2 equals 5 plus minus 2. That is not how you answer the problem, right? It has a perfect solution, and you're just kind of glossing over, and then you get the human psychology, right? That hey, I get paid the same, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if I save $1 million or $2 million, right? They're not going to increase my salary. And if I make a mistake, I could lose my job, right? And then I have like 6 kids
it
and
is
all that stuff to think of, right? So yeah, I rather not want to rock the boat on this, right? But to overcome all of these things, right? I like to engage in a conversation with those practitioners and explain to them what the possibilities are, and fill that knowledge gap and allow them to better perform when it comes to being efficient in the cloud.
interesting. We're getting towards the end of our interview. What is on the back burner for you, Dieter, in terms of content production, articles, books, YouTube channels? What is the news cycle taking you?
So because JR is definitely focusing on token economics, right? Then my focus also shifted into that area, right? Where I want to learn more about this area. This is where that cost per million token KPI came. But then, for anomalies, you need something that it is moving quicker. So just the tokens per hour is something that we use to identify token customer anomalies. If there is that stop condition missing and the agent is just spinning crazily, right? Because that thing will never stop, right? It will go 24/7 until you turn it off. Um, and so in a sense, you have a runaway problem. There's some other things that we are looking at, which is the cache hit ratio, right? If an engineer is working with a large language model, the cache hit ratio in October last year, or just like 8 months ago, right, was about 35%. Now we have it to 81%, which means that the model is caching the code that the engineer is working on. And instead of follow-up questions having to go for the full inference, right, it can work on the cached data.
Gosh.
So there is a couple of things that we discover and that helped me understand that tokenomics a little bit better. Um, I just actually talked to Joe Daly from the FinOps Foundation yesterday, made him aware of the token related LinkedIn posts, right? And I want to work more on those. But I'm also sort of preparing to have a video format where because I hate video editing, right? So it's for a 5 minute video, if that thing has to be perfect, it can take you an hour to edit that thing, right?
Yeah.
And remember, video editing is you don't have to be frame accurate for most of the time, right? If you like plus minus 5 6 frames, that's good enough, right? But still, it's like such a time intensive thing, so that I'm preparing myself to essentially go live on LinkedIn or whatnot, right? And not have to edit those videos and still be able to produce content that is valuable and is me talking live and possibly taking audience questions, those kind of things, right? So that is sort of like my long-term goal. One of the examples is that one of the recent videos that I posted on token economics on YouTube, right, uses that format where I'm like on one side of the screen, and then this side here has text, right? And then I just talk about the text, and I can then switch the content behind me, right? And just go through that. And I think it was like a 13-minute video, and I just uploaded it as is, right, to YouTube. Probably going to upload it on LinkedIn next Wednesday, right? Because I really hate video editing, and doing this type of live content is much easier for me.
Interesting. And we hope when that goes live to have you back for you to talk to us about it. Dieter, thank
Absolutely.
you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure. Always great to hear your perspective as an ambassador, as an expert. Now we discover as an AI expert. I'm sure in the next 6 months when we speak next or the next quarter, um, Fable 12 will be out and a lot of stories will have to be told.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and let's do this again.
Thank you. Thank you, Dieter. Bye.
Bye.